Oh, it opened anyway. The ghost opened it. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for attending. During the meeting, all participants will be in control of their own microphone. Please ensure that you turn your microphone on when you are speaking and remember to turn it off when you are finished. All reports published are part of the agenda will be considered as read by members of the panel. Published reports will therefore be summarised to allow the panel to focus on questions. Okay, item 1 is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Nash Asghar and Councillor Roger Tester. Anybody else? No. Item 2, urgent business. There's none. Item 3, declarations of interest. That's me, I'm a housing tenant. Thank you. Okay, item 4, members are requested to confirm as accurate record the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of November 2024. Agreed? Thank you. Okay, first item is Regulation of Investigating Powers Act 2000 update. To consider this report on the use of powers under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, RIPA, for the period November 2023, January 2025, and make recommendations to the Executive if necessary. So I will hand over to our Director of Legal Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And can I start by introducing Karen Mitchell. Karen is Interim Assistant Head of Legal Services, and this falls within her area of direct supervision. So I think it's probably worth starting by saying that this is a regular report, so you can expect to receive this annually. The last report was in March 24 to your predecessor, to the predecessor of this panel. So I do appreciate you may not be cited in terms of the background, so I'm quite happy to just provide a little bit of an overview because some of it's quite technical. So the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, and I'll just call it RIPA because otherwise it's such a mouthful, it provides a framework within which the council can carry out covert surveillance when carrying out investigations, and it ensures that those who are subject to such surveillance, that all their human rights are safeguarded. So generally, when we're talking about investigations, we're talking about offences under food safety regulations, Food Safety Act, trading standards, fraud types of cases. From 2012, the councils have only been able to use these powers when investigating offences that carry a custodial sentence of 6 months or more. And some of you who may know prior to that, there wasn't that requirement. So in 2012, that was introduced as a really important safeguard. A further safeguard was introduced, which required councils to get authorisation from a magistrate to carry out any surveillance activity. Post-2012, we've developed a process whereby all authorisations come through legal services, and legal officers make the necessary applications to court. Just before I go on further, in terms of covert surveillance, what we're really talking about is perhaps cameras, not your normal CCTV cameras that are signposted, say on lampposts, etc., or it could take the form of a physical observation of an individual. But all of that is part of the gathering of evidence in relation to a particular investigation. So you'll see from the report that since the last report, we've only had 2 authorisations, which is a good thing because I think it shows clearly that the council quite rightly uses that power as a power of last resort, because there are many options available for gathering evidence. The two in question related to trading standards prosecutions, I think in relation to counterfeit sales. Overall, legal services is responsible for maintaining a central register, and there is an inspection regime, which is when the the Office for the Investigatory Powers Commissioner, IPCO, come in and carry out an investigation to make sure that two things, primarily that we have a central record, that there's training in place, and then a third, which is very important, which I'll cover towards the end, is that the Council has a robust policy for how we apply the legislation. Our last inspection was in September 23. It was a desktop inspection, so I fully expect that there will be an inspection at some point this year or next year. Training of officers is really, really key. There are different categories of officers, but our focus is on authorising officers and investigating officers, because they're the ones who are carrying out the investigations and will need to justify their proposals for gathering evidence by using these powers. We aim to have fixed annual training, but update training in year as well as briefings. So the last fixed training was just a couple of weeks ago on the 12th of March. And then lastly, you'll see at Appendix A, we have an updated policy. We aim to update and revise the policy annually. And the main changes to the policy this time, it's in relation to updating the section on the use of social media, because obviously social media is just moving so quickly and so rapidly, but it nonetheless is a source of gathering evidence, but we need to ensure that there are still safeguards when using that source. And then the other bit relates to being able to acquire or extract data, for example, from mobile phones, etc., as part of an investigation. Hopefully that's a sufficient broad brush, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I only had the one question myself was, are we looking into AI, especially around the social media, YouTube, etc., either for a criminal part and also protection for the council? We're waiting for, there's a code of guidance, so that's updated regularly by the IPCO, and will be guided by that in terms of our approach to AI or any developments in that area. Any other panel have a question?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think probably a seminar might have been better in terms of the details of the report, which I found quite interesting. So in terms of circumstances where this power is used, am I correct in understanding that potentially in circumstances where a tenancy is a subject of illegal practices like drug abuse and all of that, and is likely to result in a criminal prosecution, does that cover that in relation to the wider issues? And I recognize that the tenants have a tenancy agreement which doesn't include anything in relation to any of this matter. I appreciate the rights of privacy, which obviously is important. And the other point I had was who are the authorised staff in the council? that can apply for this? Thanks.
Thank you. If I take the last question first, the appendix to the policy lists the authorising officers, and they are the Chief Executive, Director of Legal Services, the AD for Finance, Governance and Fraud, Head of Trading Standards, Head of Safe Communities, and the Assistant Director for that area. So it covers across the council, but at Director, Chief Executive and Assistant Director level. So in terms of your question in relation to a tenancy possibly being used for illegal purposes, generally that would quite often be within the remit of the police. So the example you gave is drug use. And so we may assist the police in terms of their evidence gathering, but they would take primary responsibility. We would have a power or a duty if, for example, it was a fraudulently obtained tenancy, or and we were looking to carry out a prosecution. So it's only if we are the prosecuting authority that this power can come into use. In terms of just tenancies generally, you wouldn't expect to see this in the tenancy agreement. It's a power that we have. It's not a right that's to be addressed by way of a contractual agreement, such as the tenancy agreement.
Councillor Selden.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Azuka and Karen, for that great presentation. First time I've received a report, so I found it a very interesting item to receive. You mentioned that there were 2 cases where it had been applied in the past year. How does that compare to previous years?
We've had definitely a downward turn. So when we were inspected in about 2015, we were close to 3 figures in terms of authorisations. Since then, we've seen a gradual reduction, and I think last year we may have reported maybe 4 or 5. So we're very much in the less than 10 ballpark. And when we had our tabletop inspection in 2023, the inspector commented that was what you would expect to start to see if we are taking the approach that it's a power of last resort.
Sorry, Chair, yeah, I had a couple of others. So in that same vein, what would you attribute the reduction in? Is it just us applying more restraint in the way in which we apply the powers, or is it that there are fewer things to apply them to?
It's our investigation officers looking at alternatives and satisfying legal services that the only available alternative to gather that evidence is to go down this road. So it's a very high bar before the Magistrates' Court, as I'm sure you know. And I think reputationally, we certainly won't be taking applications to the court unless we're satisfied that, you know, we've looked at all available options.
Thank you. That's hugely reassuring and definitely progress in the right direction. My final question was, and this is a bit of a nebulous question, I hope you won't mind, but what, if you could change anything within the scope of how RBG applies the REPA 2000 regulation, would you change? And that's with us.
Yeah, it's difficult because the policy is constructed to comply with the regulations and the code of practice, and also the feedback that we receive from inspections. So I think currently I'm satisfied with things as they currently are. I think my concern would be if we suddenly started to see an increase in requests for authorisations, that we were having to push back for not having met the appropriate threshold. I hope that's answered your question.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. That's my last question.
Any other questions? That's it. Thanks for the report. It's quite complicated, isn't it, really?
I'll take Councillor Fahy's point about possibly a seminar next time.
I was going to recommend that perhaps there's not a training, but perhaps somewhere where you can come and speak to the whole of the Labour group on that specific document.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item 6, grounds maintenance and refuse. To consider this grounds maintenance and refuse report and make recommendations to the executive as necessary. I know we've got Robert who's going to come sit forward. Unfortunately, the officer who was doing waste has been taken ill, so can't come. So any questions raised today will be responded in writing to us. So over to you, young Robert.
If I may, Chair, I'll make a quick start. So Sean Fluke, Assistant Director of Housing Needs and Tenancy. So this report concerns some of the work that Council does that has huge impact on our residents living in our council housing. As you've said, Chair, we're covering waste services and we're covering grounds maintenance. One of our colleagues can't make it today. So I'm going to suggest that we take the first half of the report and maybe do questions after grounds maintenance. That's the first part of the report, and then do the second section on refuse and take questions at that point. If that works for the panel? Is that okay? Okay. Of course I can. Thank you, Ash. As you said, Chair, at the beginning, the panel would have seen the report, so I'll summarise it very, very briefly. In terms of grounds maintenance, the actual delivery of grounds maintenance services is affected by parks, estates and open spaces. We work very closely with them on that, of course, chiefly through our caretaking service in housing needs and tenancy. We have service level agreements in place. We have regular meetings of senior management to oversee delivery of that service for our residents. The report sets out how these services are actually delivered in terms of the geographical divisions across the borough of East, West and South. It goes into quite a lot of detail about what services are delivered, so I won't go through all of those, the frequency for which the services are delivered and how that work is done safely by the staff and with environmental considerations taken seriously. There's quite a lot of emphasis in the report and in what we do on quality. So there's some data about quality at 4.2.9, but obviously we have a lot more data at our disposal should the panel wish to see further data on these services. There is some mention of the fleet, the actual vehicles that are used, and how that is done. And then the report goes into some of the main challenges. I won't read them all out. Some initiatives that are going on. And if it's okay, as the panel would have seen the report, probably just go straight to questions.
Yep, no problem. Thanks for that. So, thanks. I read the reports. Really, thanks for that, and I'm pleased that because one of my questions was frequencies of cutting, but you've that lucky enough that's in the report, and obviously we know it's weather constrained and work constrained. The only thing, unless I missed it, was, well, I'll just give you one of the question was, is there a list of trees that are being waited to be pruned? And already on the list, so we're not ordering works twice. Because there's quite a few residents have contacted me saying they spoke to Parks and they've said, yeah, we obviously can't cut the tree now because of birds nesting, but we'll be back. No one's come back just yet. So rather than, I've just wondered if it's...
Yeah, no, tree works are prioritised in terms of the level of risk. So obviously some tree work will be actioned faster if there's a high risk to tree failure and that sort of damaging a person or a property. So we have a software system where we record all the tree work and there is a list of work. So we don't always prune every request that comes in from a resident or a councillor. There are protocols in place about when work's undertaken. So, for example, if it's interfering with a TV wire, that wouldn't be, a priority. But we keep a list of the work.
Great. If there's areas of tree planting that we could suggest, is that possible?
That's definitely possible. We have a housing tree officer, Sam Bateson, so those requests can come into Parks Management or directly to Sam. The tree planting season is from November till sort of late March, so next time we'll be doing planting will now be early November of this year.
Kind of final question from me was on, are we looking, I know we can't obviously have battery lawnmowers, but are we looking at electric leaf blowers? Because one of the big complaints I'm getting from residents is the noise of the leaf blowers.
Yeah, no, some of the older equipment, petrol driven, is quite noisy and obviously emits sort of emissions. So we are sort of using now electric leaf blowers, electric hedge cutters. There is a challenge in terms of moving to that newer fleet. We obviously have got a limited budget, so that needs to be done in a sort of gradual way, but it's one of the sort of initiatives that we've sort of listed for this year to try and look at the budget that we have for machinery so that we move more quickly to that electric machinery. So that is planned, and obviously that does sort of support the council's carbon neutral plan as well.
Okay, thank you. Anyone from... Yeah, Councillor Fahy?
I should first of all begin by congratulating Sam for his negotiating skills in terms of the challenges that we face in trying to get a decision about tree pruning. And I've often wondered whether I should take a training course with him to understand. But the first part, on a serious note, and I've got a number of questions. Have the budgets decreased over time in relation to the services being provided to tenants on their estates?
I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to take that away, Councillor, and feedback if that's okay.
Well, I think it would be useful, Chair, to get an indication as to any changes that have taken place over time, really, because I think that has an impact on the performance of staff. Yeah. And the concerns, the growing concerns that tenants have about the environment in which they live.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. So I don't have the data at my disposal, but obviously we'll go off and get that. But myself and my peer colleague, Kate Wilson, who's the Assistant Director for the relevant services, we are meeting regularly. We've put together a service level agreement, and one of the things we're doing some joint work on is value for money. So we haven't finished that work yet. We've started that work, but we're both incredibly keen that our residents are getting the best possible value for money from the services. This money does flow, obviously, from the housing revenue account, from our tenants' rents and so on. So, of course, we need to be providing the best possible value for money for our tenants. So I will get the data, the retrospective data. I think the amount that went into the service last year was about £1.8 million. I don't know how much it was in preceding years. So I'll get precise figures, I'll get historical figures, and also, obviously, I will keep my cabinet member informed on the value for money work that we are doing about this. Thank you for the question.
beg your pardon, thank you, where the caretaking staff and the people cutting the grass come together. I must admit, in my own experience, that's probably limited in terms of that, because the report states that in reality where a designated cut is taking place, that the litter is picked in advance. And I think that's very rare. And I think it deprives the opportunity of seeing exactly how good the environment can be improved. If we have a situation where the grass guys come along on their machine, cut the grass and they leg it, and you go back and look at it, and it's quite poor because the rubbish hasn't been picked in advance. So it then raises the question as to why there isn't a dedicated relationship or a partnership between ground maintenance staff and caretaking in any given area. Seems to me to be an issue, Chair, that needs to be addressed in my view. Because
We do work closely with colleagues in the caretaking service, and we try to plan, that the caretakers do a litter pick in advance of us doing the cut. Obviously, I take your point, that doesn't always happen. But the grounds maintenance team is supposed to also, if that hasn't happened, or if there's a bit of litter on the area before they do the cut, they are supposed to sort of do a litter pick before they actually do the cutting on the grass areas.
Well, I've seen an example whereby, in effect, the litter has been around for about 2 or 3 months.
Right.
And the grass cutter comes along and it looks worse.
Okay, yeah.
In relation to that. And I think that doesn't provide an opportunity in tenants having pride in their neighbourhoods, because they see exactly what's going on. And there may be pressures as well in relation to caretaking staff who do a fantastic job under pressure. So I think there needs to be a more positive relationship between the two, rather than the kind of silo working that seems to be fairly visible as I go along, and other colleagues may have some other views, but it does seem to me to be practical to get that sorted out, really. And the other point I think in the report was about the engagement of residents in the work that's been done, and the complaints that we get about tree pruning or other issues relating to ground maintenance. And I must say that the amount of time we have to continually seek a response is very frustrating. Thanks.
Okay. I mean, I would just take the last point first. The level of complaint we get from housing residents is low. Don't have the actual figures, but it's actually low in reality. So that's quite encouraging. And we do try and work closely with the caretaking team, but I do take your point, it's not perfect and we still need to work to improve that.
Haven't seen my file recently regarding complaints, have you?
No.
Okay.
So if I may just come in on that. So the panel will be aware of the ways in which we engage with tenants and residents. And one of the ways in which we do that is through the borough-wide housing panel. And one of the things we're sure to do is to make sure that important matters come to the borough-wide housing panel. So grounds maintenance is certainly something residents have told us in panel meetings that they want to hear more about. And we certainly do have colleagues from grounds maintenance able to come along to borough-wide housing panel and speak about the matter, take on board all the feedback, be it negative, be it positive, and so on. And then we can act on that. And we're really ramping up our work on tenant engagement at the moment. And trying to make it much more tenant-led than it might have been in the past. We've got a new borough-wide housing panel chair, and so one of my jobs is to make sure that whatever services are going into our estates and our neighbourhoods, whatever the feedback is, that's been taken on board and being listened to, and we're acting on it and then feeding back to our residents. We've got a long way to go on this, but we're working on it really fast at the moment. And we are working up a tenant engagement strategy at the moment, and that's out to consultation soon. So absolutely take your points, Councillor, and we are trying to work ever more closely with our colleagues and other services on exactly these kinds of matters.
Well, thank you for that. It seems to me that one of the things that could happen, because not all tenants behave in terms of their environment, and that's a challenge for all of us, I think, really, to begin to seek improvements in their environment. But I was wondering whether the prospect of having a tenant environmental group in each ward, which might be a practical way of engaging people in a more responsive way to achieve a better standard of activity in their own environment, really. And some tenants do enormously well, others fail miserably. And I think achieving our carbon neutral plan strikes me as maximizing the number of people out there who want to help us and engage with that. Thanks.
I think that's an excellent idea that we will take away about different ways in which tenants can come together, and it might be about environmental matters as much as anything else. So we'll definitely take that back, and we'll take that to our next conversation with the chair of the Bar-wide Housing Panel and incorporate into our tenant engagement work. Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor Owen.
Thanks, Chair. My question's virtually been answered by your last answers, but I wondered what principle you use to resolve the dilemma and the tension between tenants wanting to have trees pruned, especially ones that are on the edge of their property in a park environment, hanging over possibly their fences, and our desire to have this, environmental policy where we are promoting net zero, etc. What are the, obviously you've talked about listening to tenants, and that partly answers my question, but at the moment, what policy structure do you have which tries to meet tenants halfway on this particular tension between a beautiful environment but getting in the way of their daily living?
Yeah, that is challenging. The answer is that is challenging because we have a sort of set of protocols in terms of tree pruning, and obviously trees are, help towards the climate emergency with all the good things they do, absorbing pollutants, etc., and storing carbon. But we do try to listen. So if there's a real strong case for a resident for a tree to be pruned, we will consider that. But the baseline policy is that we don't always prune trees that aren't in ill health or causing significant risk. So that is challenging, and maybe again that's something we need to listen to residents at the neighbourhood housing panel and take away and think about how we do that differently or better in the future.
I'm thinking mostly too of elderly residents who have limited funds and do have tree branches that are coming into their little garden area. And I've had one experience of an elderly woman who has had to pay herself to try to trim some of the branches that really are intruding on and she's been told by the council that they won't prune them. So that's the sort of thing, I'd wondered what mechanism there is for that, a person like this woman, to exercise other than panels, which are held, at intervals of some months apart.
Yeah, like I say, it is challenging at the moment in terms of that situation because we wouldn't ordinarily prune a tree that's encroaching slightly into another property if it's not causing, like say, an issue in terms of risk in one way or another. But we do need to, as I said earlier, we do need to maybe review how we deal with those type of issues going forward.
Any more questions for Rob? No? Okay, Councillor Slattery.
Yeah, it's not a question, it's just to sort of share with you my perceptions. I think that my view and I've got a roving round the borough kind of brief, is that this service has improved quite a lot over the last couple of years. There are still some eccentric, but maybe thoughtless ploughing up of residents planting when they've done some beautiful planting. I think on a estate that is dear to your heart that you represent, something happened to, I can't remember the name of the plant, but lovely planting, and it was all kind of lawn mowed over. And on occasion in my ward, there have been some fairly thoughtless pulling out of shrubs and stuff. But we've had those conversations, and it's much, I think our colleagues in grounds maintenance, which is an arm's length service that we commission, they're a bit more mindful of that. And I think the post-inspections have improved. There was a perception a few years ago that work on housing estates was secondary to parks and would be done only if it could be done and fitted in, and it wasn't done to the best standard. I do think that, whether that was true or not, I don't know, but it was for sure a perception amongst residents and amongst councillors. I do think that's much better now. But it's something that I know our head of caretaking and his colleagues keep an eye on. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, I have definitely seen quite a huge improvement in the last year and a half. But prior to that, it was a bit hit and miss. But there's always hiccups with mowing stuff that obviously the teams don't know that's there. But yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, we'll go straight to waste. Sorry to hear that Joe's not well, Joe Oliver, but I do find it a bit odd that no one from Waste Services can come, and why it was left so long before they told us. Sorry, but I just want that noted, because
yeah, so I think Jo herself fully expected to be here today, and the decision, she's very rarely unwell or off work. The natural deputies would have been either her boss, Kate, who's on holiday for some time yet, and then there is another gentleman called Olivier, who I spoke to this morning, and he unfortunately has childcare responsibilities this evening and couldn't make it, and couldn't suggest anyone else without, because then we were getting to quite a junior layer of the organisation who might find this quite, you're not intimidating people, but they might find it quite an intimidating thing to be thrown into at last minute. So it's really incredibly unfortunate, Chair, and I just can only apologise. What we'll obviously do, if we will struggle to answer questions about this. I'm not an expert in this, of course, as such, and I wasn't able to have someone by my side, such as Robert, to answer questions. So obviously what we will do, any questions we can't answer, we will get written responses to as soon as is possible. So it's, yes, I apologise profusely once more.
no, that's fine. But how soon can we expect the answers? Are Waste Services going to do that rather as quickly as they can for us, rather than wait weeks?
I'm going to say yes, they will.
Make a note of that.
Well, if necessary, Chair, I will talk with Mir Sad, the director, who will probably be mortified about the situation. Although it's unavoidable, he will be equally as distressed as I am about it. So I'm sure Mir Sad will ensure that his staff do prioritise the answers to any questions that should have been answered tonight, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so how do you want to do it then? Should we just, if I give you my list of questions first, and then I'll ask the other panel members? I don't think you're going to be able to answer them, to be honest, but you can have a go if you want. But
I wonder, is it better to give them to Maya? Or
Sorry?
Is it better to give them to Maya to record and pass on, or is that not an appropriate use? I'm just mindful that the Assistant Director, Tenancy and Housing Needs is quite a busy man. Just so him writing down questions for waste and trying to get them. He'll be willing, I know he will. But Maya, is that not right?
That's fine if...
Is that all right? If Maya wouldn't mind doing that, I think that would be a fair...
Well, if we read our questions out, our queries with waste, and then if you can answer them, you can.
If we can, we'll jump in.
If you can't, and then we'll just wait for the written responses, yeah.
Thanks.
Chair, I don't know what your questions are, but mine had a number of follow-ups that would depend on what the answer was. So I'm wondering whether it might be worth deferring this part of it to a future meeting. Because it's only like a page and a half of stuff they've done. I'd imagine they'd probably talk a lot more than just what's on that page and a bit.
Unfortunately, this is the last meeting for them. So, but what we can do is we can ask the questions now, and we can, depending on if panel members are available, seeing as they couldn't come to us, then I don't see any reason why we can't descend down to Birchmere Depot. Yeah. Yep. Is that something we can leave you to organise, Sean?
Again, it's not his department, but he's a very helpful man. He could trigger, I'm sure that Sean would happily trigger that with the director and then let them sort it out with you. I think it's a good idea. You go to them and ask all the questions. Just to reassure you too that tenants will have an opportunity of quizzing waste colleagues, assuming they come to the borough-wide housing panel, which is, I think, 2 or 3 weeks away. So, no, sorry, I beg pardon, it's in May the 22nd. So tenants and leaseholders will certainly have a chance of quizzing them. But maybe it's a good idea for the committee to go down to Birchmere and have a session.
Yep. Okay, but we'll ask our questions now, and then when we get the answers, then when we go to Birchmere, we can follow it up. I wasn't asking Sean to physically go to Birchmere and go put the kettle on. I was just asking him to liaise with Mersad, if possible. Yeah. So the questions I had was: have we managed to catch any of the fly tippers on estates refilling the bins once they're emptied? Why does it take so long for blue contaminated bins to be emptied? Because what happens is the crews turn up, they cover all this red ticker tape all over the bins, contaminated, and it can take up to, I mean, sometimes it's 6 to 7 weeks before that bin gets emptied, and they just sit there, just looking like a crime scene, really. The other issue is, and I've witnessed this, is some crews only empty €4 bins. If there's like half a bin, they'll leave it. And then we get loads of complaints from the residents, why didn't they empty all the bins? They're only emptying the full ones. The biggest issue at the moment is street litter bins are not being emptied. We've reported this. A couple were re-emptied but haven't been emptied since. So what really, there always used to be a litter bin emptying schedule. I'm not sure if that's still the case. It's a pretty poor service at the moment, but I'm not sure whether that's due to the new implementation of road sweeping schedules and moving crews off of vans onto barrow beats. So some clarification is who empties the litter bins, how often and when would be good. So they're my questions. Sorry, from other panel members. Councillor Anning?
Mine is a suggestion, Chair, which could be recorded so that we could see how it pans out. And this is about recycling. And of course, it's a constant challenge to encourage people, especially in communal buildings, to recycle. And in my experience, it is not easy, even for someone who knows a lot about the environment, to work out exactly what is recyclable and what is not. I know that we do get various bits of information, but I also think that we should try to make it very simple for people. You know, for example, in some countries they talk about wet and dry, because people can understand what is wet, that is food scraps, etc., and what is dry, even though dry can include items that are not recyclable. But wet and dry is a very good way of simply thinking about it. But secondly, in order to motivate people, it would be very good if we could have some posters, when we have posters up in estates, to show what's recyclable, what's not, is the result. Because we put these things in, we try hard to recycle, but what is the result? Where is it going to? How is it being made into new things? And I think psychologically, if people can see that those items have actually been made into new glass bottles, new plastic something or others, or new paper, that it provides an extra incentive, even though it is still always difficult in communal areas. So my suggestion is that some very smart person comes up with some really clever little posters and things that help people, because they've got so much on their minds. They have to be given some assistance to do the right thing, because otherwise, if the bins are, as you say, contaminated, then they say, well, why should I bother? So let's try and get some, community spirit going. So that's a suggestion.
Councillor Fahy.
Thank you, Chair, and I think it's important that we try and meet the team as speedily as possible, really, because there are issues that we constantly get in our post bag. I think the concerns that I have are around staffing and budget. It seems to me that there has been a deterioration in the service being provided, and it's a frontline service which everybody wants to see prosper in real terms, and it's all about visibility. If a street bin on the road isn't picked up and is left there for weeks, then it overspills, and people then decide, well, we can throw some rubbish next to that, and that's fine, and all of that. And the other issue which has been identified fairly regularly is the lack of street bins next to bus stops. Either somebody picks them up and takes them away or whatever, but a lot of them go missing, and I think that needs to be looked at as well, really. But I think there are a whole range of issues that kind of need to be sorted and kind of take stock as to where we are, what do we need to do to get to an improved service, really. Sorry. Thank you.
Councillor Selden.
Thank you. I did warn you, Chair, that this was probably one of those follow-up questions within questions things. So my first one relates to the trends on the rejection of contaminated blue bins. What are we seeing in terms of trends, and how does this compare across areas, and is there anything that they can see within that? Secondly, we switched to fortnightly black bin collections some time ago now, and one of the things that I asked for as part of the Cabinet Members' Climate Change Working Group was, can we take a look at any environmental savings in terms of our carbon footprint from those changes, which was undertaken to be provided, and it was, can this be provided? And that would have been, depending on the answer, possibly a recommendation for the Scrutiny Committee. And the last one, similar to bus stops, and the fact that we had kind of grounds maintenance as well as refuse and waste collection, even though it's not strictly applicable to our estates, quite often, so I've got a litter pit coming up in one of my local parks this Saturday. 11 o'clock, if anyone would like to come along. We'll be meeting by the fountain in Hornfair Park. What we often find is that actually it's stuff blowing into the park from especially bus stops and from overflowing litter bins. So when people are clearing up and emptying a litter bin, do they actually clear up round it? So, do they say, well, that's not in the litter bin, that's not something we do? Because at the last one a month ago, I spent the best part of 20 minutes behind the bus stop on Shooters Hill Road, just dragging rubbish out to stick in a black bag that had accumulated from that, and also blowing into the parks. Are there opportunities for our grounds maintenance people and our refuse collection people to proactively go, well, actually, there's a fence here, or there's a gate here, and even though that's outside the gate, I'm going to do a bit of picking up inside because that's just going to end up one side or the other depending on where the wind blows. And it was really, how do we explore that synergy in the way in which we provide our services? And that was it.
Over to you, Sean. You can answer any of them? No, I'm on it if you can't. Don't worry, I'm only joking. Sorry.
One thing I can say is, again, the tenant engagement work, we need to focus in on exactly this sort of thing more than we have been in the past. So there's definitely some stuff I can do to help with that.
I would say, Chair, as well, if there are bags left next to a bin in a park, the parks teams will collect those. They won't just empty the bin. And I'd assume that street services colleagues would do the same, but obviously we need to double check that with service.
Yeah, sorry, so my comment was more if there's a bin inside a park that's overflowing and street services go past and do one just around the corner, would they pick up the one in the park? Because the park doesn't necessarily have the capacity to go out and do stuff out on the street services, but street services might be able to just come into the park. I speak of a specific example where there's one within sight of another, and one seems to get emptied more than the other.
Okay, so thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, so we go to item 7, responsive repairs and empty homes update. To consider repairs update report and make recommendations to the executive if necessary.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just take a canter through the report, but just to introduce Dermot and Beth, who've joined me this evening. Dermot being our Head of Responsive Repairs and Voids, and Beth being our Senior Lead for the Repairs Transformation Programme. I'm not trying to promote or demote her by saying that. I'm not quite sure of the job title, but Senior Lead for our Repairs Transformation Programme. So I'll just take a very quick canter through the report. It's just an update on our repairs service and what our focus has been over the last year. Starts off by talking about our repairs transformation programme, which has been very successful in implementing various things such as our damp and mould team, website updates, follow online on our various trades, which have been really positive. The report then goes on to talk about voids, and I believe some members went out on some void visits over the past few months, so have a sense of kind of some of the challenges we have in that service, but clearly we've seen massive improvements in our empty properties turnaround, the number of empty properties that we've got within the borough, which is positive and feeds into a healthy income for the housing revenue account, but also helping house people who are homeless, etc. Members may be aware that last month, just at the end of last month, we signed off the new pay and reward deal with the unions, the collective agreement with the unions, and that was agreed at the General Purposes Committee at the end of last month, which was really positive. It was a year and a half worth of negotiations with the trade unions and ended up in a positive result all around, I would say. It talks about some human resources support we've had in our repair service and the positive impact that's had in changing the culture. From paragraph 4.17 onwards, we've then added in some performance reporting, which I think shows a general upward trend in performance for repairs, in satisfaction, and also really shows how we benchmark well with our peers across London and other London local authorities, and how our repair service is perceived by our residents. So not just transactional surveys where somebody's received a repair, but the perception of our repair service overall has improved over the last year as well, and continues to improve. We talk about some areas of requiring focus, so we're not trying to shy away and just say, blinkers on, we know it's all perfect. I think I sat here a year ago and said, might be a year ago, might be less, that the repair service was better than the previous year, and it was better than the previous year before that. At no point does anybody here think it's job done for the repair service, but we are seeing gradual and good improvements every year, and we're really focusing on what we know is important to residents. So, and we think that the satisfaction is showing that, but we also are quite self-reflective on the areas that we know need to improve. The report also talks about contact centre performance. We have recently joined together both the Birchmere and the front office contact centre under KIT, under the digital and customer service team. So now the responsibility for repairs calls is all within one service, and there's a part of the transformation program that's looking at how we can then really improve, that change can really improve service of residents. So it's no longer a case of, oh, you've come through to the wrong call centre, we need to transfer you to Bircham here. Oh, you've come through to the wrong call centre, we need to transfer you somewhere else. But having a one kind of stop shop for residents, so they can call at once, do everything they need to do, and then hopefully receive a much better service. And then the final, well, the couple of penultimate parts of the report, reminding members that Councillor Slattery chairs a members' repairs board, and we have one coming up on Monday, where various members deep dive into the repairs transformation service and the operational work we've been doing, and that's on its 10th or 11th iteration, I think. We've had quite a few over the last couple of years, and they get to really dig down into the service every few months and see what we've been doing and what we've been up to. There's a brief note on 4.33 about our capital programme. We've got a new asset management strategy coming forward, and obviously 400 million's worth of investment into our housing stock, which should have a knock-on effect to requiring less responsive repairs. So we're trying to make sure that we're focusing that investment on where it's most needed for our residents. And then under section 5, we've broken down how we're consulting with residents. It's not just about us in a room saying we think this needs to change, but through our operational service, through our repairs transformation piece, how we're continuing to talk to residents about what they need, what they want, and how we can improve the service for their betterment. So at that point, Chair, I'll stop for questions, and if happy to take any questions.
Yep, thank you, and thank you for the report. There's a couple of questions from me. I was reading in the report, you're trialling a new AT card system. I was just wondering what process is involved in that, and is there any results from that? And the other one that I found quite interesting was that some staff now ringing the residents before that morning to say we'll be there at 10, 11, 12, whatever, to do the job. How's that going? Has that been good? And is the telephone maximum wait time reduced since you've merged with the contact centre? Because some of these times are 57 minutes, 39 minutes, so is there been an improvement? So that's my 3 questions.
Thank you, Chair. Who's going to take the out card and the staff ringing bit? Beth, start.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, so in terms of the new outcarding process, there's a couple of things that have changed there. So as you mentioned, calling residents more frequently and calling them more times as well ahead of the appointment. So there's been quite a lot of training of trade staff and kind of breakfast briefings around that one to ensure that that happens. And we now also, when we do outcard, we write an appointment option for a future date on the back of a card as well, and we kind of coordinate that with our planners. So yeah, that's a new kind of service or a new process that we have launched. And yeah, we have seen some reduction in no access as part of that. So I think I've got a stat from January this year. So we had outcards focusing in on plastering. So we had 16.8% in January of outcarding, and we've reduced that to 8% in March. So we are seeing that reduction. With a lot of the kind of transformation work, it's taking a bit of like a pilot phased approach. So we're not doing this with all trades at the moment, but yeah, we're doing it with a few trades and we're getting some good feedback. So yeah.
I'm not sure I've got the contact centre stat on the maximum reduction. So I think the maximum weight is variable. It's been very variable. We put a lot of resource into it probably about 2 years ago now, because we knew that our phone lines were really letting us down, and it was a constant complaint we were getting through. I think we've seen some significant improvements in how we're doing call handling. But it is variable. It depends on the resources we have. It depends on the resources that Debbie Coveney have. So I should be fair in saying all the resources are now under Debbie Coveney, under the contact centre, but some still are co-located with us. So it depends on resources. So I don't quite have an answer to. We can find the number for that for the last few months. What I would say is the project we're doing is all around making sure that the service for residents, by combining both contact centres, making sure that residents can get through quicker, can do what they need on one phone call, and kind of leave that call understanding exactly what's going to happen next. So just some prime examples of that is my understanding, is the understanding. That, for example, if you called to book a new appointment, you called one call centre. If you wanted to change your appointment, you called another call centre. If you got through to the wrong call centre, you had to be transferred somewhere else. And one of the things we're trying to do is and that was all about permissions on systems, etc. And one of the things we're trying to do is you call one place, whether you've booked an appointment, whether you need to change an appointment, whether you need to cancel an appointment, call one place, somebody answers, they can do all those things for you. And then we're hoping to see that massive increase in customer satisfaction for how we're doing the service, but also reducing those call times, because what that was creating was significant failure demand of people having to call back different places and call through to different places. So I think we'll get the start on maximum wait. Were you going to say something about that?
Yeah, only Chair, if I may, only that is the maximum. So if you look at the average is 4 minutes. 57 minutes, obviously terrible. Hopefully not, because we've got a system now that says you're 10th in the queue and your probable wait is 10 minutes or something. At least people can make a decision that no, they really can't be waiting 57 minutes, but if they need to, they hang on. So quite pleased with the 4-minute average time, which is a dramatic improvement from about 3 years ago. You'll know that I regularly ring it myself, the number. And a few times it's been 19 minutes, but honestly it's never been more than that. And that's usually when there's quite bad weather has taken place over the weekend, and we've got all sorts of issues with slates and leaks, and leaks is my new bugbear, as Dermot knows. So 57 minutes is the worst, 4 is average, but obviously it would be lovely to get all of that down. Thanks.
Yeah, because when you used to ring the contact centre to book a repair, or you was following up a repair, you obviously had to wait in the queue to get answered by the contact centre, and then they said, oh, we'll put you through to the back office at Birchmere to speak to the guttering supervisor, and then you just like were constantly on the phone. So it's really good news that you've looked into that and you're sorting that out. Just one more, sorry panel, just one question was, when I visited Birchmere a couple of years ago, the operatives were really upset with their tablets, not their paracetamol, but their tablets that they were constantly moaning never worked, and it messed their work up, and when they got to a job the signal went and they couldn't fill in this. So is that something under the digital part that you've looked at to replace the tablets, or?
So that is part of a new upgrade. So the whole housing management database called NEC is going to be upgraded. So indicative timeline is meant to be late summer. As part of that, it means we're in a position to give the operatives new kit. For those reasons you've said. Some of the issues that you will have observed, Councillor, we've improved a bit already, because it had to do with the connectivity and a VPN security type thing. So that it has improved, that experience for our operatives has improved, but I think we're probably at the limits of what is possible now with the current iteration of our software and our kit. So the next big leap is going to be with this upgrade, because not only does it upgrade the core housing management database, but it also upgrades the planning system. And then part of that is how the workers then receive their jobs on the tablet, which will be a much quicker experience.
Councillor Lanning?
Thanks, Chair. Well, congratulations on the huge increase in the damp and mould operations. Really impressive. I'm not very good at maths, but it looks to me like it's more than threefold in 1 year. And I recall 3 years ago when you first started this operation that you said, be patient, the results will come. Well, it sounds like they are, which is great. But I was a little bit concerned about your stats on the non-urgent repairs. It doesn't seem to be moving much. And I wondered what they are. What do you class as non-urgent repairs, for a start? And do they include leaks? Because if you are a tenant, you don't think that's non-urgent. That's what, number one question. And number two is, I'm still getting reports of residents who are getting visits by multiple people coming to have a look at something, not having the right information, going away, then someone coming again and coming again. Now, this may be decreasing now, but do you have any way of tracking that? Do you have any way of knowing, except for, say, the resident or the councillor telling you, that that is still happening? Because it's obviously a problem with some bits of the service not talking to the other bits or reporting back correctly. But that is, and residents are concerned because they feel it's a waste of our council money. They are concerned about that. They want their repair fixed, but they don't want to see the council wasting money either with multiple visits. So that's the multiple visit thing. Do you have any idea how to monitor that? And secondly, what are non-urgent repairs and why are they not having as much success as the urgent ones?
So the definition of urgent and non-urgent is based on time. There is a category as well of definition of what type of job merits that quicker response. So typically that stat would probably refer to an urgent being something that requires immediate intervention by the landlord. Typically that's in the 2-hour window. And so, as the stats suggests, we are quite good at that. We will ensure that we triage and take a very resident-centred, job-centred approach about saying what is urgent, getting out there, stemming what needs to be stemmed, resolving what needs to be resolved, and so we're quite good at that. The other thing as well, just to echo that, is the performance of our out-of-hour service. It's one of those kind of services that doesn't get much attention because it typically works. So we don't get much complaints over it. We have a good, it's one of the virtues of having the DLO is that we've locally based staff who know the properties, who know the issues, who can get there in a very, very quick time. So the urgent response for all of those reasons is quite good. The non-urgent is typically a result of just general capacity. So we have to make judgments. That we receive about 60 to 65,000 repairs jobs into my service a year, and so how we put in place a resource that we can afford to meet that demand and serve it as best we can is always an operational consideration. When we're achieving those type of figures, one, it's about just, as I said, having the necessary resource to meet the demand. Two, that figure will also, in some almost perverse way, also reflect an improvement, if you will, because we've spent a lot of time on the backlog. And as you'll see from the report, it's gone down from 11.5 to about 8 to 4. We're now, we've improved that since. But as you complete that job, you've missed it. So there will be, and that is not to say that that is the only reason. We are looking at improving performance for non-urgent by having a trade-by-trade level. So rather than, and I think you used the analogy before, rather than just saying, hey, let's replace a carpenter because a carpenter left, to actually ask the question, well, how many of particular trades do we need? So make more intelligent decisions about which resources that we're having in place. So I think the fact that we've improved our data intelligence around that 65,000 jobs and breaking it down, slicing it out, dicing it by the different repair type and putting the resource in place to I think that is helping. But there is going to be a lag factor because when we eat into that backlog, if your target is 20 days and you completed 21 days or 121 days, you've missed it. So that's going to be, and we'll experience that. We will experience that for a while, but we are increasingly looking to see and evolve our data suite around monitoring at a trade-by-trade level. How are we doing against urgent? How are we doing against non-urgent? So we can again endeavour to make those interventions as best we can.
About multiple visits,
So multiple visits is a bit of a symptom of that. Some of those backlog jobs are backlog because they've got stuck. And so what we've done is, in essence, we're seeking to, while we improve contemporary performance, we've also put in place dedicated resource to deal with the backlog. So as the report said, we've got some agency staff in for a lot of those jobs that have been left on the too difficult pile, or they needed parts, or they needed somebody else to make a decision. So in essence, it's almost like a two-pronged attack. So try to get contemporary performance better, but equally have an absolute rigid performance on what's at the end of the queue. So that's, in addition to the backlog coming down, it's also shortening. So as we enter this year now, we have no jobs outstanding from the year before last year, where previously for the last couple of years we would have been carrying multi-years. Now we're just down to this year and last. And that is a significant milestone that we've achieved, but obviously we want to now tackle the end of last year's and so ease into that one. And that will pick up a bit of that, and obviously we're also getting better at analysing those jobs and giving them the attention to unlock them.
Chair. I think Councillor, and I'll ask Dermot to speak about this a bit quickly as well. One of the things where I think your reference is where we kept sending PSOs around, property service officers, that go around and inspect, and then they go around and inspect again, and then they go around and inspect again, and different PSOs came along before a job was raised. So, and Dermot's restructured that whole section of the business, so there's a multi-level kind of PSO and building survey, is that right? I think if you just touch on that part of the business.
Sure. So part of the investment into the business is introducing additional management and technical capacity. So that will have a higher caliber and higher expectation of a management core to unlock the challenges that we have and make the improvements. But on the technical side is introducing for our damp division and for our general property services division an enhanced surveyor role. Frankly, we were very much under positioning that role relative to what you would as a landlord and how are you going to attract that caliber of people into the business. So we've regraded the role up. We've filled as of this week, we filled about 25% of that team already. The management cohort has already been filled at the senior level and the mid-manager level. So that team is fleshing out, and we're already seeing the difference that enhanced technical robustness is giving us in terms of how we're tackling and resolving cases.
Councillor Selden.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that comprehensive overview and the report that you prepared for ourselves. I have a few questions. So one of the things I had was, in terms of your urgent repairs and non-urgent repairs, that's been reported as a percentage. What percentage of your jobs are urgent and what percentage are non-urgent? Because obviously it's great to see an improvement, and you know that we're hitting 90% pluses, 95% pluses usually, almost, in the non-urgent. But if that only constitutes 1% of the jobs, then actually we really need to be looking at the non-urgent repairs. So could you tell me what percentage of the work that needs to be done is under urgent and non-urgent? And I've got a few follow-ups after that.
So broadly speaking, trying to work out a simple maths on this one, it's probably in the urgent category about 35–40%, so it's actually quite high. It fluctuates, but on a week-to-week basis, when those jobs are recorded as urgent and non-urgent, it falls roughly around the 35–40% urgent category.
Thank you. Yeah, that helps put the figures into perspective. So really, we can almost balance them as equally indicative of the kind of work that we do. So my next question is around the non-urgent repairs completed within time. Now, this has hovered around the 55 to 65%, well, 57 to 67% for all 3 years reported. That's kind of within the margin of error, I would suggest, and the margin of what needs to be done. What are we doing? Why is that? So, why are we missing our targets on roughly 35% of our jobs, 35 to 45% year on year.
Touched upon what I was saying to the early councillor earlier, is the other fact that the time targets are actually quite severe. So the non-urgent target can be as quickly as 20 days. So when you have a lot of jobs under a 20-day regime, given the volume of those jobs that you have, unfortunately, it creates the opportunity that you are, with that very tight deadline, that we are going to miss more than we should. Now, still, we are obviously achieving 60% plus, as you say, but that leaves a lot of jobs that we're missing our target on. So it's partly, as I said, is the reasons earlier, but it's a very unforgiving time frame. And the question we have to ask ourselves as a local authority is to what degree of investment we want to achieve that, and what does every percentage cost us? Because we could do it. You can get to 97%. It would probably cost you a couple of million quid in resource, in the worst example. But even putting that aside, there are things that clearly we need to do better in terms of making sure that we triage the call more effectively, get it right first time fix, so we're getting there in a quicker fashion, and we're achieving better first time fix rates. There's still outside of the resource question, there are still things we can and will do to endeavour to improve that.
Could I just add to that, so if you don't mind? I think there's a lot of context here that Dermot's alluding to. So we said urgent is around 35%, 40%, but actually it shouldn't be. That's probably too high. It should only be around 10%. But we get called out to a lot of jobs that are not urgent, but they've been classed as urgent because of the way it's been diagnosed. So there's issues around that. Needs diagnosing right in the front. And if you're not responding to most of your jobs as urgent, you've got more time to respond to your non-urgent jobs. So there's stuff around that. As Dermot's articulated, we had this significant backlog when I took over the service 3 years ago, and when Dermot took over the service 2 years ago, his service. And there is no nuance in that figure of, if you complete it in 21 days, it's out of target. If you complete it in 51 days, it's out of target. If you complete it in 121 days, it's out of target. And every time that Dermot's been tackling that backlog of repairs, so if we say we've got a backlog of, say, 10,000 repairs, and loads of them are from last year, so we really need to tackle those ones because people have been waiting a year. Every time you complete one of those, it goes against your target of you not hit a job in your time frame. So the more, as Dermot said, the more we do, the worse our targets can get for this, but actually the better service for customers, because somebody who's been waiting for a year gets a job completed. And I think the way the service is running, the excellent job Dermot's done around really bringing that backlog down. We're getting to a stage where I think it was 3,500 the other day. So we've really, when we've really got over the rump of that, you really start seeing some impact in that urgent, non-urgent number, because we've got jobs coming in, we can schedule them in, we're not dealing with the massive backlog, we can schedule in, and we can hit that target more often than not. And it might not be the 90%, but it should be creeping up to the 70, 75, 80%. So there's quite a few issues across that whole piece of urgent, non-urgent, but it's a key target for us. It's also a key target because I think it is a tenant satisfaction measure as well. So it's something we report to the regulator as well that they'll have a look at. So it is, but it is, Dermot has been a victim of his own success here in that regard.
Good thing to be a victim of, Dermot. You did actually anticipate one of my next questions, which was around the triaging. And it does sound as if there needs to be some improvements around the way in which we triage. But that would actually then move stuff into the non-urgent. And I take your point, scheduled work, you can do a lot more hours worth of stuff than you can do for emergency, non-urgent work. Question I had was around the categorization, which is within the urgent and non-urgent. So just exploring that a little bit. So I've worked in sort of maintenance repair stuff. Richard knows this is kind of one of the areas that I have some background in. One of the things I'm very used to seeing is a backlog in terms of hours of work. So I presume if you've got a blocked toilet or a bulb that needs replacing, there'll be a certain amount of hours associated with that. So, and you may produce job sheets and stuff to do those things. So I'm more used to seeing things like a safety critical maintenance and repairs backlog and a non-safety critical backlog. And these are measures by which we do stuff. So the actual numbers of jobs themselves, you know, it could be 20,000 hours to replace a compressor in my industry, or 30 minutes to replace a light bulb. So it's actually the hours which are probably more important than the number of jobs. Now, you've reported the numbers of jobs here. Would it be possible on the next report to actually report the backlogs in terms of an hour's backlog?
It would be possible, but I
Sorry,
think
that wasn't a question. That was our recommendation. My recommendation as a member of this panel was please look at reporting this as an hour's backlog in future reports. And do you have that within your current systems by which you're looking at it? Because if you don't, my recommendation would be to take a look at getting an hour's backlog, because that's going to give you a much better picture than just counting the number of jobs.
Yes, Councillor. So absolutely appreciate the point, and it ties into a few bits of work we're doing. So yes, our service has hours. Each job, the way that the pay and reward structure used to work was based on SMVs, standard minute values, and every job that you'd raise in NEC, Northgate, sorry, would have a standard minute value put against it. Few issues there. One, as you know, standard minute values in a works order doesn't necessarily mean how long it takes. It means how long it should take, and that's done over averages. But also one of the main issues is that part of the reason we said that the pay and reward system could never work is that our system doesn't really work very well on the standard minute values, and we couldn't calculate them properly, which is why we could never calculate the pay and reward system properly for our trade staff. And the final issue that we're one part of the transformation programme we'll be looking at over the coming year, now the pay and reward deal is done, we will be we've got our own Birchmere scheduler rate codes, which will have their own SMVs against them, and we're going to move to the National Federation codes, NatFed codes, for raising repairs orders, and they will have a different set of standard minute values, and that's more of an industry-wide set of standard minute values. So the panel is very welcome to recommend, and we might be able to pull some reports off about the SMVs and how long kind of in hours we've got. I don't know how much use it'll be, and I think it might be a bit of a nonsense and a bit of a red herring. Maybe once we've done the upgrade to the NatFed codes, we'll have more of a view of the SMVs and how much work we've got in minutes tied to those things. But as I said, part of the reason that the pay and reward structure never worked is that our system just wasn't really, it didn't work for SMVs.
Yes, I appreciate that, and I completely agree that it doesn't work on individual things. So, for instance, changing a bulb, if you can do it off a step ladder, is going to be considerably fewer minutes to do than if you need to hire in a cherry picker or erect scaffolding, and they don't capture the necessary indirects to get that work. So scaffolding and cherry pickers would not be included in those minute values. So I completely recognise that. However, the reason they exist is because they do work on a global level, and at a large enough scale, they are reasonable. Some jobs get done under, some jobs get done over. So really, really glad that you've resolved the issues around the incentivised pay scheme using it. But I think there is a lot of value in that data for us to see, because, again, the numbers of jobs don't really tell us anything. What we want to know is how big the job is, and the only way I can see us of getting that is if we can get something based on, you know, hours of backlog. So if it's something you can do and something you can look at, I'd rather not argue about it now, because I think it's something you can probably look at. It will certainly exist within your job carding and scheduling system. I've not seen anything that doesn't, any system that doesn't include that, even if it was run on a spreadsheet. So I imagine it does exist, the capability, so if that's something you could look at. And then I've got just one or two more after that.
I'll bring in Councillor Farey first for his questions.
Chair, sorry, can I just come in on that just briefly? Only to say, I mean, absolutely make the recommendation. I think for me, as a cabinet member, I would be very interested in the calculation between the benefits of doing that and how long it's going to take officers to do it. So we need to be able to do that and share with you what we think the outcome is. We have to be clear why you find it more useful to know that there's 5 small jobs and 5 big jobs than to know there's 10 jobs outstanding. I think I don't understand that bit, actually. That's the bottom line.
I'm happy to clarify for the cabinet member. What I'm interested in is rather whether there are 5 jobs or 10 jobs, I'm rather interested in whether there's 10 hours of a backlog or 10,000 hours of a backlog, because that's where the difference is. So the fact that there was 11,500 jobs one year and 4,500 jobs another year, that doesn't really tell anyone anything, even yourself. Now, if you were to say that 11,000 hours, if you forget the 11,500 jobs and the 4,500 jobs, and you said, in that year I had a backlog of 60,000 hours, and now I've got my backlog down to 15,000 hours, regardless of the number of jobs you're doing, because it still takes operatives to go out and do that work, then you have a better understanding of how big a challenge you have. So 4,500 jobs remaining, if all of those are 1-minute jobs, then yeah, that could be done in 2 or 3 months. That's taking it to an extreme. But if all of those are 10-hour jobs, you may need another 80 operatives to get them done within a year. So that's the reason I'm asking for it. I'm happy to have a chat with a cabinet member outside of this. But as I said,
that might be,
I've never worked anywhere where we haven't seen this.
So just, and I absolutely appreciate the point, 100% take the point, and if we can, we'll have the conversation, if we can get the data easily, it's not a problem. I think the difference there, Councillor Seldin, is the industries you work in. Our jobs are generally the same jobs over and over again. We don't have a compressor that takes 20,000 hours and a gas boiler that takes an hour. We have generally, gas servicing will be, you do a gas boiler, you do 12 gas boilers a day. So it's not going to be that on one day they're replacing a massive kind of communal system, and the next day they're doing an individual gas boiler. They're doing a gas boiler every day. So I really don't think there'll be that much level of variability. Our plumbers go in and they might change a sink or fix a washer. Our plasterers go in and plaster an amount of meterage on a wall. There is not specific variabilities across our trade. It's generally quite a lot of the similar stuff. So I'm not sure that will show a massive difference in that regard.
do you want to discuss that afterwards and go to your next question?
Happy to take that afterwards.
We'll just go round and round otherwise.
Yeah, my other one is around the escalation potential of work. So Councillor Anning mentioned leaks. So leaks are something where, it starts off small and it gets bigger. Again, this comes back to the triaging system and the criticality. If we've only got 2 levels of priority, as I understand it, that doesn't really give us a granularity. So there might be a job that we could quite easily go and fix. But if it's in the non-urgent, in a week's time it could be urgent, and it could be a lot more expensive because you're having to replace floors, replaster walls, those sorts of things. Do we have that provision within our system? And if not, is that something that you feel we should look at? Because it seems like a pretty obvious thing to me.
Indeed. I don't know, Beth, do you want to speak a bit about the leaks work that's going on? So it's a key area for us, so it might be worth...
Oh, thank you. I can't speak specifically about the kind of system functionality there, like right here, but what I can say is we are currently doing a big project around leaks where we are essentially understanding the as-is and mapping out the process from that kind of awareness, reporting, triage, getting the works done, and kind of finishing and closing it off. So we're currently doing a big research piece into all of the different leaks offer, and as part of that we will absolutely be looking at triage. So earlier on in the report we talk about the damp, mould and condensation work, and as part of that we implemented a new 2-stage triage process, and that's included kind of new targets and things like that, and new processes. So we're going to be replicating a similar approach, so we'll be very rigorous and kind of looking into that. So happy to look into the kind of system thing within it, but yeah, lots of work coming up on that one.
Thank you, and the panel and officers and cabinet member, glad to hear this is my last question. So just before Christmas I was contacted by 2 residents, both of which had issues with blocked toilets, and this was the beginning of December, and they were told actually they'd been given an appointment out sometime in January. Someone had been out to come and take a look at it, and they'd supplied the resident with a porta cabin, and they'd arranged for someone to come in and empty the portaloo, and someone was going to come in and empty that. I think it might have been outside their house or whatever in winter. So not the greatest situation for the residents. So for me, it seems slightly unusual. So, I have had a blocked toilet in my house, and I phoned round a couple of places, and they had someone out that afternoon to jet it through. Do we have the capacity to, in instances like that, where there is a cost saving, to say we're going to move outside our DLO and engage an external contractor to come in and do that? Because when I just looked at the costs, as I did, being quite quiet at that time of year over Christmas, of how much it costs to hire a portaloo and get it serviced a couple of times a week, I couldn't see how getting someone out with a jetting system couldn't have been more cost effective for us as a council in terms of the service we offer to our residents.
I'd like to see the detail of that one. It is unusual. We don't have, that isn't a particularly requirement. As you say, we have jetting in the DLO. We have quite a large, plumbing is our largest team, needs to be larger, to be fair, given the number of plumbing, drainage and leaks we have. So that would be unusual that that resident had to go through that experience, unless there is something more fundamental in the repair that warranted that response. That wouldn't be our go-to solution. The ones you speak to would be not just from a cost perspective, but from a humane and resident perspective. We wouldn't put a resident through that unnecessarily, unless there was some just outright physical impediment that couldn't be solved. So I'm happy to look at the circumstances of that, but to provide you assurance, we would be in the same place as you're thinking. Cost, obviously, but probably more importantly for us is doing well by that resident as quickly as possible, and we have the means to. In answer to your question, yes, we do have a contractor resource available. Of about the 65,000 odd, we send about 5,000 odd out to contractors. That type of job isn't typical because there's no need. There's other trades that within the DLO you just wouldn't, you don't have the rest skill set or demand to want to build an internal team, and it's more effective to put out a contractor. That scenario would be unusual, and we don't send a lot of plumbing out. The one thing we will send out in that area would be things like if it's a drainage matter and it requires a dig out, say to a certain meterage, there's whole safety measurements around excavation and all that type of stuff. Those would go out. Again, they're rare rather than common.
Councillor Fye.
Thanks very much. And just before I ask a couple of questions, if I might, thank you for organising the visit we had to the empty homes, and congratulations to the staff who are doing a brilliant job in that regard. I suspect that the repair service operates within a finite budget, and so therefore challenges, I guess, crop up every hour of the day, if not every minute of the day. So if a person rings up, and your colleague has left, so I won't ask her the question because she's not there, but whether they have to wait 4 minutes or 20 minutes, the fact that they ring up means that their needs are urgent in their view. So in real terms, how do you make a judgment between what is regarded as an urgent or non-urgent repair? And in terms of that, do we know as to how many calls are made subsequent to the first call to get the repair done? I could spend the evening rehearsing all of this, but I won't. Because it seems to me that we ought to be proud of our services as a good landlord. And so therefore I think it's important to give that message to people. So the final point I wanted to make is with regard to the difference between 35, 45 or whatever in terms of the discussions that are going on. Is that figure likely to come down, or is it is the urgent and non-urgent dependent on the budget you have at any particular month or week or day? How are the judgments made? And I think it would be quite useful, Chair, to have, if you have details as to what is regarded as urgent or non-urgent. So when people ring up, we can say as members, this is the situation we have, and these jobs aren't urgent. So we can perhaps add value to the repairs being done and giving some comfort to the tenants who are anxious about getting the work done.
Thank you, Councillor Fahey. So, and sorry, Beth just passed me a note to say she had to. There was an urgent. She had to leave urgently for something. So, apologies, she left. So, there's a couple of things I'd say on that. One, we knew. So we've done so many changes across the service, and all of them been for the betterment of the service to customers. One of the things we've constantly known is that this two-tier call centre and the way that we triage calls, answer calls, and service our residents both don't help our residents and don't necessarily help our repair service either. What's classed as urgent and non-urgent are part of the repairs handbook, and that can be seen online. So we do have a thing. But if you are saying to a tenant, you know, it's a leak, and you say, is it an uncontrollable leak? And they say, well, what does that mean? Because most leaks are uncontrollable, otherwise it wouldn't be a leak. So, but what we mean by that might be, you know, can you put a bucket under it? Can you wait a few days? How quickly is the bucket filling up? But they might take uncontrollable leak as actually meaning, well, I can't control it, so it's uncontrollable. So there's a lot of work, and part of the reason we've combined the contact centres together is to really try and get that triage correct up front. One place that a customer can call and get an answer to what they need, but also Beth's team and Dermot and Debbie Coveney are kind of the leader of that service, looking at, are there kind of better things we can do? Are there WhatsApp pictures? Are there video calls you can do? Are there things where there's people who are great at triage at that front end, able to diagnose straight away, so we know, do we need to be there within an hour, or do we need to be there within, you know, a week? And we hear, I've not seen it myself, but we hear time and again from repairs operatives that somebody's just used the phrase uncontrollable leak because they know that means we'll run around with an emergency, and actually when they've got there, it's just a bit of a drip coming through. Now, admittedly, as Councillor Southern said earlier, that could get worse, so there's a question of, do we need to handle that straight away so it doesn't get worse in the long run? But that's the difficulty we've got. Really trying to get non-technical people to diagnose a technical problem is sometimes difficult. And I've worked in various housing organisations, and I've worked running various repairs contracts, and generally what you get from your repairs contractor is your staff aren't diagnosing the problem correctly, therefore we're not sending the right people, or we're treating it as an emergency where it doesn't mean an emergency. So it's not RBG specific. It's across the housing sector, you'll hear that time and time again. So part of the transformation we're doing there is to try and get that right. The second point I'd make is in the report we mentioned the repairs follow online, which I think is absolutely fabulous that we've done for residents, and that's rolled out across all trades in your service now, most trades, 3 trades, whereby if somebody goes round, is plumbing a trade, just quickly? Cool. So if a plumber goes round and follow-on works are needed, that plumber does not leave that property until the resident knows what happens next. They've got the next appointment booked in. They know when the next trade staff member is going to come round. And that resident is left knowing, okay, I know what happens next. And people may remember this from when we did the first deep dive, we said we're leaving residents to project manage their own repairs. They have to call back. And now with this follow-on line is, we are leaving your properties, but you know what happens next. You know what the next step is, you know when they're coming round, you know what you should expect, and that's kind of some of the work the transformation team's been doing really successfully across the service, so people have real clarity on what work we've done and what comes next and when it comes.
And just to comment on that, if I could, Chair, just to say another thank you. I've had an experience of that with one resident who needed a new disabled bathroom and got a clear idea of where he was in the queue. and how long he would have to wait, and then he was incredibly impressed with the results. So that was a win. And I think that's probably showing up a bit. Not that everything's perfect, but you know, he was rather pleased.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Slattery.
Only to, everybody's had their questions, haven't they, Councillor? Yeah, only to wrap up really, to say it's incredibly kind when people congratulate us, so thank you. Because it's human nature is to hone in on the deficits and the defects, and I do it myself. So thank you for taking the time to do that, it's appreciated. And the two men here and this woman who's left were the other large reasons in the main why the work has produced so much improvement. I've just sent you all a link to the repairs handbook, just so you can, over coffee, when you get up in the morning, have a little look, you see. It's been, Bethany has led on revising it and making it much more user-friendly. So do have a look, give us any feedback. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I was just, thanks, and I was just going to say what Councillor Fari said was that our visits to the void, I think we saw the good, the bad and the ugly that day, and the ugly was definitely ugly. How you're going to turn that one round, I don't know. But anyway, it was a really interesting morning, and I can't remember the staff member's name, but if you could send our thanks to him. Sorry?
OV Workpay?
Yeah, if you could send our thanks to him for a fantastic morning, and we're looking forward to spending the morning with him in temporary accommodation soon. Yeah, so thank you very much for that. And thank you for your reports. Thank you. Okay, you staying, yeah? Okay, thank you, Dermot. Okay, so item 8 is leaseholder charges. To receive a verbal update on the leaseholder charges from the Assistant Director, Housing Needs and Tenancy, Sean. And I presume that's Steve with you? Yep. Could I just ask you first, Sean, just to explain to the panel why no one could turn up? I know you sent me an email, but I didn't get a chance to forward that on to the panel members.
Yeah,
please.
So this time it's an apology on my own behalf, which is that we were unable to hit the deadline for submitting a formal report to the panel on this subject due to a range of reasons, including, I suppose, the right to buy application situation where we received 1,000 right to buy applications in a 3-week period last year. Well, the head of the service, Stephen's manager, was off sick for a very long time at the same time, unrelated to the right to buy application tsunami. And also there's been a huge amount of additional work relating to the rollout of the capital programme to leaseholders in Middle Park, and that needed a lot of attention, and rightly so, but it was unplanned for as such, the amount of work that was involved, plus other service challenges. So we didn't make the deadline, regrettably, but what we have supplied, it almost could have been the report, we just couldn't get it over the line in time, so it doesn't have legal and finance comments, and it isn't a formal report. So that is an apology, and this really was an exceptional situation, which I hope does not happen again. I very much intend that it never happens again. But it was unavoidable, honestly. It's not Steve's fault.
Great, thanks. Well, has panel members all read the report? Okay, so if we go straight to questions, then
Fantastic.
Is that
yeah,
okay?
Absolutely.
And do you want to
yes,
do
please.
them in? If we do them in blocks of 4, if I do mine first, then yeah.
Yes, thanks, Chair.
So when blocks are assessed for service charge purposes, are they really comparable with other blocks and other flats? Because I do get sometimes someone in a block of flats comes to me and says, my neighbour upstairs is a leaseholder and she's paying £100 less on leaseholder charges than me. Just couldn't. same size, I presume, not being in them, but if you could explain that one, that would help me out. What steps are taken to involve leaseholders in decisions around major works before they begin? Is the leaseholder's service adequately resourced and in terms of software and staff? And are leaseholders kept informed of all changes that could affect them, especially with the major works that are coming up over the next 3 years? So that's my list of questions first.
Would you like to answer the first one, Steve? Then we'll do a double act on the next 3.
Thank you. Leaseholder charges, they're apportioned based on what's detailed in the leases, and it's basically by rateable values. Rateable values were last measured in the 70s, 1973. Basically, we apportion charges by then. So it was basically the size of the property, location, and things like that, and sort of the rentable value of it. That's how we apportion charges. And what happens is each flat obviously has its own rateable value. It's then divided by the block or estate. So grounds maintenance, for example, would be an estate service. And then sort of block repairs would be a block repair service, and block caretaking and stuff like that would be apportioned by the block. And then it's times by the cost for that year. So that's how they will be variable. Mostly, in most blocks, there are a different amount of sort of rateable values. They are kind of variable. Engagement, do you? Yeah, the current engagement at the minute, we're currently looking at how we can engage more and what offer we can offer the leaseholders and what they want. So at the end of this month, leaseholders that have registered for Your View, they're going to be invited, and housing champions that are leaseholders are going to be invited to a session. We're going to propose what we would like to look at jointly, and also listen to them and see what they want to look at. So that's the plan going forwards, and then based on that is to put a plan in place to see how we can jointly work with them, and kind of hopefully come up with specific objectives so that there's focus for each session.
Just want to talk the panel through the current process, step-by-step process.
For major works, major works consultation, it's the statutory requirements are to serve a notice of intention. So there could be different notice of intentions, basically. If there's just major works, like ad hoc major works, then it would just be a notice of intention. Leaseholders get 30 days to return their observations or make observations on the works. Then between after that time and the next notice, we would go out to tender, or Richard's team would go out to tender with procurement, and then we would serve a notice of estimate. So we would advise them of their block cost, the contract overall figure, the cost, and then their likely contribution on estimate. And then they get another 30 days to respond to that. And then basically any observation they send back on both notices, we then have to give due regard and respond to.
Thanks, Steve. So just to build on what Steve said there, in terms of going forwards and the lessons we've learned from the first sort of big group of leaseholders to have capital works done under the programme who live on Middle Park, the main lesson learned is to try and build in a lot more informal information, if you see what I mean. I won't use the word consultation, because consultation has sort of quite statutory ramifications and whatnot, but we just need to be giving out more information further in advance, opening up those channels of communication and engagement. And actually, we're working on a plan, as Steve did say, for that. And that plan does involve not just there being more information going out earlier, more frequently, but more opportunities for person-to-person engagement with people about exactly this. So that's something we are working on under Pat's quite close guidance, following a lot of engagement, as I say, with Middle Park leaseholders. So that's a work in progress, and there'll be a product that comes from that we're working up across repairs and investment and my own home ownership service very soon. And we'll be sharing that with Middle Park leaseholders to make sure they're happy with that. We will be working with other leaseholders, as Steve so rightly said, the housing champions that are leaseholders and the most engaged leaseholders. And we are looking, generally speaking, I think your fourth question was a more generic question about leaseholder engagement. So we're working on that as well at the moment. So we are soon, exactly as Steve said, going to have a meeting with the most engaged leaseholders to find out exactly how they would like to be involved and engaged and work with us much more closely. We have made attempts over the years to do this. We've run forums and done various things to actually try, but they haven't worked successfully. They haven't worked sustainably for whatever reasons. So we're trying again, and we're hoping that this time, maybe because of things that have changed, such as the capital programme, meaning that there's something that binds a lot of leaseholders that are going to get capital works for them together. So we would like there to be leaseholders leading the engagement in the same way we have the borough-wide housing panel chaired by a tenant. We'd like a leaseholder to be kind of chairing whatever form of engagement leaseholders decide that they want. And we want leaseholders to be able to be as clear as they can be about what it is they want to hear about. At the moment, the main place where leaseholders can engage with us is the borough-wide housing panel. But really, that's more geared towards the needs of tenants than leaseholders. It's hard to do both at the same time. Well, almost impossible, in fact. So, yeah, we're going to come up with a separate arrangement for leaseholders as soon as we can.
Thank you. Councillor Fahy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your apology, but don't worry about it. We all have these problems from time to time, so need to challenge them and deal with them as a matter of interest. The point I wanted to begin with is in relation to the leaseholder revenue charges, which are set out, as I understand it, in the leasehold agreement with the borough. And so they're a given in relation to that. So my first question is, what impact, if any, are government changes likely to have on leaseholders generally and in Greenwich in particular? So it would be useful to have a note about that. And I think pleased to hear that you're concentrating on getting a leaseholder forum, which I think is extremely important because they have a voice and they have comments to make. But I think I'm currently dealing with a piece of casework which in Woodville Close, which was a contract established for 18 weeks and is now finished, not totally finished, in 48 weeks. So, am I correct in understanding that regardless of the contract entered into by the council and the contractor, that the liability for the increased charges on that work are going to be levelled on leaseholders? And I think that the other point I wanted to make is that there needs to be some relationship, in my view, between the works being done with housing services and procurement, because there ought to be some way in which the ability of the contractor to come in on completion of the work in line with the budget that was agreed. And every time I've asked this question, I'm dealt with by a simple answer: commercial confidentiality. And I think it's a major issue for councillors who are not able to advise leaseholders on their rights, because they can go to a leaseholder tribunal if they want to. But should we not be more generous in offering some local support to sort out their bills? Because it seems to me, and it seems to some leaseholders, that all that's happening is the work is contracted, the deal is made. Are there any additional costs in the budget? I have no knowledge because I can't get the information. And should that be passed on to the leaseholder? My view is no. So there should be some rationale between the council as a whole to come to an understanding as to the amount leaseholders should pay in clear terms, not to be whacked with a bill that they've got no control of or no input in to the contractors. And there are some very difficult contractors out there who don't abide by the contract that we've agreed with them. And I think that's a major issue for this council and for other councils across the country.
Can we take those in reverse order? Yeah, Richard's happy to take.
Thanks. So just on that last point there, Councillor Fahy, I think, and Steve might be able to say more if needed, but when we send out bills, we send out estimates, and then we do the actual calculation at the end, and the actual calculation could mean that leaseholders get a credit, or it could mean that leaseholders get a debit because it's cost more or it's cost less than what we estimated originally. I think what I'd say is that it is correct that we charge leaseholders what they are expected to pay as part of their lease, and when they buy a property, they get a lease, and there's that expectation of that. However, we are very cognizant that we don't want to unduly affect leaseholders where it has been a delay that is totally out of their hands. So I know that, for example, I wrote a report probably about 6 months ago, a year ago, where over the COVID period, because planning had taken a while, the price of glazing had gone up significantly. And we said, actually, we're not going to pass that cost on to leaseholders. It's not really reasonable, so we'll keep the cost to the original base. As you may or may not know, over in Middle Park, we've worked with the contractor to say, yes, we're entirely correct in charging leaseholders the charge that went over, but actually, for various reasons, we think that that charge is probably too high, and we work with the contractor to bring leaseholders' bill down by about, I think, £3,000, £3,500, £3,500 on average. So I would strongly say, as a council, we are incredibly right to charge leaseholders what they need to pay, but actually we do internally have these conversations and reflect on, is there anything where we're overcharging? Should we be actually reducing those bills? And we absolutely are cognizant of the fact that, and I said to somebody a few weeks ago, there's rarely any other space in life where you don't have a choice but to pay or not. You know, if it was your own house, well, it is their own house, but if it's their own building, you'd say, do I want to do that roof or not? Can I afford it or not? But the council comes along and says, we're doing your roof and it's going to cost you £20,000, £15,000, £10,000, and you have to pay it. Now, it's right that we charge people to do that, but we also have to keep in mind that we don't know where they are at their stage in life. We don't know if they've got that money. We don't know at what point in their life that's hitting them. So we are very, very self-reflective on what we can do to mitigate the impact for leaseholders. And as I said, over the past few years, there's been a few reports I've written to say, actually, that's not reasonable, so we shouldn't charge those extra costs to leaseholders. We'll bear the burden ourselves.
Is it not wholly inappropriate for leaseholders to be charged for agreed variations made by the council without any discussion with the leaseholder. And if I, in my own property, want to get the roof done, it's a price, a fixed price, and you pay it. And if the roofer comes along and say, you have to pay more because of X, Y, Z, you say, well, there's agreement, and that's it. Why should leaseholders have to argue constantly about all of this stuff going on, and they got no information about why these changes have taken place?
So I think, and it depends on what contract you have with that person who comes around your house. So that person probably is putting in their contract something on the lines of, yeah, we'll change the roof, but if we get up there and there's asbestos there, then we can't touch you without spending way more money. And therefore, it's getting your specification right in the first place. But always when you do contracts, there's going to be things that come up, things like asbestos that come up that you're going to have to pay more for removal. And is it right that we charge leaseholders for those extra costs if they are valid? Yes. But we're absolutely focused on getting those estimates right as much as possible in the first place to make sure that at the back end leaseholders are really clear. But I challenge, and I've had work done on my house a few years ago, and there were things that came up that I had to pay extra for, and it's very simple to say, oh well, you just do it, because what stops a contractor saying no and then walking off and then you've got half a roof finished? There's risks either side there.
Councillor Slattery?
Yeah, I just want to add, it's a difficult line to tread, this one, but if the leaseholders don't pay their fair share, the only other pot of money is formed from rents from tenants. So we have to be very careful not to be in that situation of getting tenants to subsidise leaseholders. And I'm pretty sure everybody would agree with that. But at the same time, trying to be as fair and compassionate as we can be. But there is no pot of money that says, you know, help for leaseholders. It is just the rents.
Councillor Selden?
Thank you. So I've got two main areas. One of them is around the kind of middle park and the leaseholder charges for capital stuff. But I'll start off with the easy one first. So leaseholder repair charges for communal work. How do we work out the charges to a leaseholder if that's been done by a member of our direct labour organisation, as may be the case in a mixed ownership block? The reason I ask this, and for context this might help, is in the last couple of weeks I've had two people come to me to say that the council has charged for work in a communal space which they've received their portion as a leaseholder, and they've looked at that and they've said, well, actually I could have got that job done for a lot less, so they don't understand the charging basis for that.
For our responsive repairs contract, there's a schedule of rates for each job, and then when we would have consulted with leaseholders, that would have been available as part of the consultation exercise. So yeah, that's basically where it is. Any repairs that are booked in on the repair system, the internal system, what happens at the end of, well, we do it every month, but we download a list of completed repairs every month, and then basically set up a table which, and obviously let leaseholders know at the end of the financial year, each repair to their block or estate. But it's all the costs are based on that initial schedule of rates.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was going to ask a quick question. Just sorry on the question you raised. It always used to be if areas of the block were vandalised, that wasn't rechargeable to leaseholders. Is that still the case?
Where possible, where we know it's to do with ASB, yeah, we try not to charge it, but it does depend on how it's recorded on the system. Obviously, if someone says there's a broken pane of glass or something like that, then obviously we're not necessarily sure whether there's a wear and tear element or whether it is ASB related. So some do get charged.
Yeah, it was something we always used to do when I was a caretaker, was if it was vandalism, we used to report it as vandalism rather than just as a natural wear and tear.
Yeah, so actually it was a kind of... Sorry, Sean, did you have something you wanted to reply? I'll come back in after.
Just ever so briefly, so you said some residents say they could have got this job done cheaper. So just generally speaking, when we contract, we have a lot of different clauses in the contract to make sure there's quality, to make sure that it's a reliable provider, supplier, etc., etc., etc. So sometimes our contractors might be more expensive than someone you know from the pub or whatever, or someone out there who might be just as reliable or even more reliable than our contractor. But we have to have contracts that cover huge amounts of our stock, and we build in a lot of quality assurance measures and other metrics like social value and so on into that. My general point, though, is that a lot of these questions the panel are so rightly asking, we are going to include in a frequently asked questions document that we're going to create that will end up on the website. So a lot of these things are things that leaseholders are asking all of the time. And at the moment, they're tending to have to ask on their own individual case-by-case basis. So there's going to be a lot better information out there that explains why we have to charge what we have to charge. For example, how do we contract, et cetera, et cetera? How do we measure quality of the work? And some of the other questions have been asked tonight. So these are all questions we're very much aware of and going to make sure that we address widely.
Thank you, Sean. I can assure you that my question wasn't rooted in going down the pub and getting a quote from a bloke sat on the table. This was actually more related to, and I think Stephen's point, and this would help me unpack a little bit. So the charges for, say, doing a job were set in the original leaseholder agreement. They have been escalated in line with whatever, but actually the market rate for doing that job may now be less than the escalated value. So I know from having work done in my own house and repairs, actually, whereas, house values and other things may have increased by, 8, 9-fold, the price of labour, an electrician to do stuff, a plumber to do stuff, hasn't risen by that, which is why we've got a cost of living crisis, because, wages have fallen and costs have fallen behind, costs for other things. So it's really that kind of question. So how do we actually make sure that what we're charging is in line with a market cost for something?
I think Steve can talk about how the calculation is done and where it came from, but there's once again, we have a DLO. Our DLO has certain costs, and our cost from the work we've done around the pay and reward and the work we've had to do there is absolute recognition that our trade staff were paid significantly higher than the market were paid. And the work around the pay and reward scheme we've done is to start bringing that back in line with where the market is. So there's a question of cost, and Steve might be able to say, I don't know if it has been uprated every year by a percentage or something on the original schedule of rates, but actual cost of our DLO is probably significantly more than anything you'd go out on and find in Yellow Pages or in any reputable place, because, and that's the whole reason, that's why we brought forward the pay and reward conversation, because we were paying way above the odds for our trade operatives. But I don't actually believe that feeds into schedule of rates piece that Steve spoke about, which is the stuff we've got on NEC. I don't think there's a link between what our trade staff are paid and the schedule of rates. And I'm looking at Steve, say, was there an original schedule of rates which was uprated by, say, 2% every year, or?
I'd need to check that, to be honest. I'm not sure whether it's uplifted each year or not.
So if it's based on the schedule of rates we use in our system, then that is uprated, I think, by inflationary figures every year, so 2.2% or 2.1%, I think it was over the last year. I'd have to come back to your councillor and double check that figure. But equally, when we're talking about subcontracts, our subcontractors, we did see significant inflationary increases asked for by them, because they were seeing costs going up 10, 11, 12% year on year over the last few years. So the construction industry, the repairs industry have seen significant inflationary increases over the last few years.
Thank you. I'll take the Assistant Director up on his offer of a written response for that. Yeah, I think that would be helpful. So for the purposes of clarity, what I'm asking for is, in terms of repair charges, how do we make sure that what we're charging our leaseholders for a repair is in line with the market value for that work? That is the question. I'll then now move on to my next question, which is, and you've mentioned Middle Park a number of times. Would one of you be able to remind me of the value of that contract for Middle Park?
It depends what you mean, the value of the contract. So the value of the entire RT was, I think, was it 80 million each, I think? It was 80 million each. No, it was 60 million each, I think, wasn't it? Yeah. We tendered a package of works across 3 main areas for our capital contracts. And those contracts went out for, I believe it was 60 million each, 60 or 80 million. I'm fairly sure it was 60 million each. So we've got Axis, Equans, United Living. So that was the value of the contracts. That was the what went out. The Middle Park work is different. That's kind of a sub-bit of work under those contracts. I don't know off the top of my head the total cost of Middle Park to leasehold. If you mean Middle Park as a whole or Middle Park just to leaseholders, it's a different figure.
So you've actually anticipated my next question. So for me, the thing is, let's call it 180 million across that. As a rough percentage, if you don't have the exact numbers, do we have an idea how much of that 180 million, as a percentage, how many of people are leaseholders there? Because this kind of plays into the risk thing that you discussed earlier on, which I'll get to in my next follow-up.
Other than using the percentage of leaseholders we've got versus tenants, then that's it. So what's that, 20%? No, 15%? Yeah. So we've got 20,000 tenants, 5,000 leaseholders, so.
Great, that's easy. That's maths even I can do, which means about 36 million of that 180 million are borne by leaseholders. That's roughly 20%. That's exactly 20%, in fact. So for me, the issue is that a lot of leaseholders, and I've seen stuff in the press, so I presume we're funding this as a council, so we'll be paying up front to the contractors, and they'll be recovering the costs from our leaseholders, that 36 million. So for me, that's 36 million that's at risk. So, and given the number of disputes at the moment, that's a hole we're going to have to carry on our balance sheet going forward. Now, I can kind of see the stuff that we've got in here about the way in which we charge and the way we do cost recovery and stuff. And can I actually say, I accept your apology for this report, but it was actually far better and far more easily digestible for me than a lot of the reports we get. So it would be great if we could get all our reports like this, which would be absolutely brilliant. No, I know, it's great. It's succinct, it's pointless, it answers the question, yeah. Quicker to write, quicker to read, easier to understand. That's 3 big ticks, so thank you very much. Well, I keep on asking for a one-pager. I've never worked in a place where I haven't either been asked to prepare a one-pager or been presented with one, and that's at senior, significant levels, and at all levels, you need a... They might do, but certainly national government demand a one-page PowerPoint slide of the most complex projects. But I digress. So on that, really, to me, that 36 million could potentially be at risk there. Now, given the disputes, until we actually get paid that, that's a hole we're going to have to carry. That's a red on our balance sheet going forward. How are we mitigating that risk? Because for me, the thing is, if we do go through this and we do have appeals against that, and someone comes back similar to my thing about, actually, someone's gone out and got quotes, and these aren't quotes from a man at the pub. These are quotes from, registered roofers who comply with all the things, and they've got, working out height regulations covered and all their low lift, their lifts and all that sort of stuff. And we are challenged on those. And actually, they seem to be saying that they're getting quotes around 60% to half of what we're asking them to pay. For me, that's 36 million. That is a balance, that's a cash flow risk that we're carrying going forward, and potentially an unrecoverable percentage of a significant amount. And given, the pressures we see on budgets, what are we doing in order to mitigate, understand, and possibly offset or absorb those risks? Again, I'm happy to take a written answer on that rather than doing it here.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to follow up in writing or anything, but I think it's worth saying that the 36 million isn't all at once. So a lot of this is predicated, the £400 million capital programme. If you read the HRA report, a lot of it's predicated on borrowing, and actually it's about 80 million a year, probably less, 60, 50 million a year. So we are not, it's not all at once. We're not seeing that 36 million as a red kind of on the balance book. We're borrowing as we go along, as we invest. Therefore, the whole number might be 36, although I think it will be less than that because not all. So if you look at the capital
if I could
program,
just stop you there for a moment, but recognition that even if it's 80 million a year, unless we can get these resolved within the time that we spend out the money and the time we get the money in, that will accrue. So potentially that could be, we could be carrying multiple years worth of cost on our balance sheet. So that's really the point I'm getting to. I just don't want you to get hung up on a particular number or particular detail.
so, but I think the point I was making is it doesn't all hit in one go. We spread it out over certain years, but I take the point. The mitigation, so there's a difference between our responsive repairs, which is, you rightly point out, we have a DLO, and how does that tie back to, because we haven't been out to market, obviously, for our DLO. Our DLO is just something we have in-house, and we don't kind of refresh the market every year. For these large contracts, we have been out to market, and that's how we know that challenge is, wouldn't really gone.
Sorry, again, it wasn't about the validity of the challenge. So it is, if this were to progress all the way through to, we make a payment, the resident were to make a counter offer of a payment of less than we got, of the average of the quotes that they got, or even the highest of the quotes they got, and then that went through the necessary process of us sending letters, them sending letters, and I kind of look at the timetable here, and it could be a year plus before it actually gets to a court, so we could end up covering that, having to cover that ourselves. So it's really what are we doing around mitigating that risk.
Yeah.
I think we'll do written answers now, Councillor. It's interesting. There's a lot of comments being made, preparatory to the question. It's taking quite a long time. It's late. Can we please do written answers now to Councillor Saldin?
Yep, that's fine. It's fine with a written response. You did say a written response at the beginning. That's fine, yeah. And that's it. No more questions. Thanks very much for coming. Thank you, Sean, for covering a couple of positions, and Stephen for coming from home ownership. Thank you. Have a good evening, what's left of it. Thank you.